Second Level of Learning, Paper 1, The Feminine Universe, by Penre Publications, by Penre, Wednesday, May 2nd, 2012. The history of progress is written in the blood of men and women who have dared to espouse an unpopular cause, as, for instance, the black man's right to his body, or woman's right to her soul. Emma Goldman. When above the heavens had not been formed, when the earth below had no name, Tiamat brought forth them both. Tiamat, mother of the gods, creator of all. The Enuma Elish. A fascinating story. When I was new to the internet back in the late 1990s and started researching different alien races, Robert Morning Sky was a researcher I quickly took to heart after I had read his Terra papers. There he talks about the reptilian Orion queens, who are supposedly one, if not the, oldest star race in this section of the universe. David Icke has dedicated much of his research to expose the reptilian races as well, as have many others. Robert Morning Sky is a full-blooded native Indian, half Hopi and half Apache. He got his basic information from his Hopi grandfather, who told him about a star being, a star elder, as he called him, whom they had rescued from a UFO crash sometime in the late 1940s. In return from have been saved and cared for, this short, skinny being told them the history of the stars as it pertains to Earth, and the ancient story of planet Earth, which star beings normally call either Eridu, Terra, or Urus. It was a fascinating story about the Queen of the Stars from Orion who got in conflict with a younger star race from Sirius. This confrontation, after a lot of twists and turns, came to involve planet Earth in a very profound way and to such an extent that it directly has to do with the creation of mankind. Robert became so fascinated by this story that when he got older and started integrating himself with the civilized world, he spent much of his time researching what his grandfather had told him. He was stunned when he found out that what he'd been told as a child most likely was true. This inspired him so much that he wrote a research paper to give to his teachers. This, to his big surprise, at the time, was met with rejection, low grades and he almost faced expulsion. Discouraged, he went back to his tribe and asked them if his grandfather had lied to him, but they explained that in the civilized world, they don't believe in such things as he's been told in the tribe. Nonetheless, the event with the Star Elder took place, they reassured him. So the young Robert continued his research and in the 1990s he released the Terra Papers, which became a success. He then started traveling around the world, holding lectures, and also teaching people in smaller groups as well as individually. However, Robert was heavily attacked, his office was broken into, research material was stolen, and his life threatened. He withdrew in 2002 from public appearances, not only due to the attacks, but also because further research had led him to believe that the Terra papers were wrong. Not in essence, he said, but he got the locations and characters wrong, and he didn't go back far enough in time. However, with that statement, many people probably wrote him off at that time, and although his research was always in the back of my head, I went on looking into new things. Now Robert is back online again after many years, publishing very interesting material on his website, robertmorningsky.com, and he also has a sister site at robertbearclaw.com. His material, building on his 15 years old Terra papers, is now being released in increments. So why am I starting the second level of learning with this story? Well, it's because in his early material, Robert Morning Sky claimed that the Queen of the Stars and her Orion Empire believe in the divine feminine. In other words, they were, and still are, absolutely certain that the universe is feminine in nature. Up until recently, I thought this was hogwash. How can the universe be feminine? Everybody knows that it's either masculine, or more likely, neuter. I knew certain sources claimed, independently from Morning Sky, that God is feminine, but I hadn't looked further into this matter myself. I couldn't even picture this, because I didn't believe in God being a deity, that is, a person. Little did I understand at the time that this is not what it's about. It was not until I started listening to certain interviews on YouTube with Robert, where he talks about the divine feminine, that my interest began to grow, and I decided to research this in more detail. I recently also reviewed the Terra papers again, and I still find them being perhaps one of the most accurate compressed research I've encountered to this day about certain parts of the ET issue. I believe I can see what he means when he says he got certain parts wrong, but in spite of that, he is still quite accurate from my perspective. This will probably become clearer as we move on through the second level of learning. Since I listened to the Divine Feminine interview on YouTube with Robert Morning Sky, I have learned that there is a lot of information which supports his research into ancient human history, and it's not hard to find, either. In this paper I will do my best to show the reader that what I thought was nonsense just a year ago, I now find overwhelming evidence for, and certainly not only from Robert Morning Sky. Is the universe feminine, created by a mother goddess? Let's start by looking at a few different sources to see what they have to say about the divine feminine. In level 1, I discussed the Anunnaki, who came down to earth and started the patriarchal regime, which culminated with the biblical patriarchs, but has followed us up to present time. Although we see more women in power today than we did a couple of hundred years ago and more, men are still the ones who rule this world, and the women in higher position are just working out of men's principles. On Earth, men have filled the highest echelons of power for thousands of years. Women who reach top position are still subjected to a man-dominated worldview and are simply females executing male policies. At the same time, many people have wondered why this is. Me and my friends used to discuss this when I was a teenager. Of course, we had no clue at the time. We saw the feminist movement form and rise, but it was a Rockefeller-sponsored movement, instigated for many reasons, except for the right one. Women started reclaiming their rights in the late 1960s, early 1970s, just like the black people did with Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, both assassinated, as their main spokesman, and the powers that be felt they had to do something about this upheaval, anticipating that this movement could possibly expand. So the Rockefellers and their fellow elite wanted to firmly make a statement that nothing would be better if women were in charge. But more importantly, they steered the movement in a direction so that women became men. Many women in the movement even cut their hair to look like men, put on men's clothes, hid their femininity, and some of them started to despise and even hate men. I know this to be true firsthand, because I grew up with it. Some young men even became afraid of these women and lost their own masculinity, only too willing to please. There were those who were afraid that no women would like them if they didn't bow down to them. And what these women were misled to wish for was power, just like men had been misled to wish for power over many millennia. It was just the other end of an extreme. At the same time, women who still felt they wanted to remain feminine and keep female values were caught between and started feeling uncomfortable with being who they were, pressured by the women's liberation to change, even attacked for being just women. This movement did much more to enrich the patriarchal movement than to promote the divine feminine. The visible leaders of the feminist movement were all agents provocateurs, and more importantly, it was run by men. The movement, predictably enough, soon died out and the men in power could relax again. The Rockefellers and the patriarchal regime had proved that the world would not be a better place if women were in charge. We still need to ask ourselves, why is the power elite so afraid of women coming to real power? Why have women been so suppressed and abused over the millennia, more or less through the whole history of mankind? There must be something women have that men don't have, or have less of. But what is it? The secret to the struggle between the female and the male is an ancient conflict that goes back way before mankind was born. It has to do with the female sexual and spiritual powers of the gods. This power, as we shall see in later papers, were transferred down here to Earth when Homo sapiens were created, hundreds of thousands of years ago. This is why the patriarchal regime has such a strong hold on Earth and has had for such a long time. The divine feminine was suppressed by the gods, and from their standpoint, it was for a good reason. Before we were visited from a star race from Sirius some 450,000 to 500,000 years ago, other star races had already been here and were still here, teaching the beings living here then about the divine feminine. I will show, beyond reasonable doubt, how the patriarchal regime changed the world religion from one where mankind was in touch with a female divinity, mostly without worship involved, to several different religions where mankind worshipped masculine gods. Robert Morning Sky is calling what the women have an abundance of fire. This fire is directly connected to the goddess universe, the feminine cosmos. It's not that males are not connected to the divine, we all are, but the females are directly connected with the prime energy of the universe and therefore came first and by default have more essence than males do. So already here we see that the Genesis story in the Bible is reversed. In the Bible it said that male became before female, which I claim is wrong and has been changed by the Syrian patriarchal regime to support worshipping of a male god. The fire is another word for soul, our very essence, what LPGC calls information cloud, which is the divine energy surrounding the body and which contains our personality. Of course, both men and women have a soul, and we both have a fire, which is the powerful energy of the soul. However, according to my research, which is confirmed when looking into most ancient civilizations and tribes on Earth, the feminine aspect of the soul has more goddess power than the masculine because it came first. What the global elite and their extraterrestrial masters are most afraid of is that people in general, and women in particular, are going to develop more of their feminine energies and become more powerful. Hence, the feminist movement in the 1960s and 1970s, where the feminine aspect of women were diminished, was instigated by the men of power, and both men and women lost their identities, and it was also a blow to the family unit, which they know is a strong bond between people. The power they are so afraid that we will develop also has a much deeper meaning, which will be discussed later. It is so secret that the powers that be and the ETs who manipulate them would lose their control over us if we really knew and started using our powers. Matriarchs versus patriarchs. As above, so below. The struggle between the feminine and the masculine is almost as old as the stars. Those who have studied Freemasonry or read up on conspiracies know of the saying, as above, so below. This means that if it happens down here on Earth, it also happens in the heavens. This struggle is no exception. Galactic wars have been raging in one sector of the galaxy or another almost since the beginning of time. As long as there are opposites, men and women, black and white, good and evil, and so on, star races in the universe who are evolving always seem to have something to fight over. And as long as there is separation, there will be concepts like mine and yours. This is particularly true when it comes to galactic real estate, something I brought up in level 1 as well. Beings out there in space are constantly fighting over planets, solar systems, and in some cases over whole galaxies, or groups of galaxies. It just goes on, and is often a stage in a species development. And with time, star races normally become more peaceful, but not always. However, beware of those who tell you on forum, websites or elsewhere that the universe is an extremely violent and warlike place where star races are killing each other all the time. This is not true. In general, the multiverse is a place which supports love, compassion, and empathy as well as growth in consciousness and awareness. Therefore, the majority of the multiverse is a friendly place where certain laws and rules do apply. Still, species are always in different stages of development due to an almost infinite multiverse, so we can expect that there are races who fight over real estate instead of ethically and morally earn the real estate they want. A planet belongs to the star of that solar system, and the planet herself is a sentient being, and usually, the creator gods who seeded and developed a certain planet as its overseers until the evolution on the planet takes off on its own. Or, at least, that's how it's meant to be. A star system may be part of an empire, however, and that's when the fighting comes into place and different star races are trying to claim ownership to expand their own race and safeguard its survival. But besides fighting over real estate, there is also this ancient fight between the genders. This is not necessarily something that has to do with the development of a species, though, not in the same manner as the fight over real estate. The disconnection between the genders, wherever this is a problem in this universe, can't be totally blamed on one gender or the other. It's a co-creation. The female carries the secret of life. She is the one who brings another person into being by uniting the sperm and the egg, and from there create new life. This is something only females can do. However, the female energy exists in both males and females, and sexuality was originally meant to be something sacred. The mother goddess loves sex when there is a spiritual connection between two partners, because that's one major event when a real communication and connection between the goddess and her creations can take place. In the beginning of time, the genders came into competition with each other. Males got jealous of the feminine powers, especially the sexual powers the female possesses when she orgasms. The real purpose, and the co-creation between the male and the female, was forgotten as soon as jealousy came into the picture, and a misuse of sexual energy became the consequence of this competition. It eventually created matriarchal and patriarchal movements, where both were extremes on their ends, all in the apparent effort to appease the goddess and win her love. Albeit, the competition soon led to a worse distortion, where the males wanted the female power in order to control both her and his environment. It became a rebellion against the mother goddess herself. The males started torturing, killing, and raping women in order to control them, but also to have them share their secret powers with them by force, something that they couldn't do, because they were not for men to experience and couldn't easily be explained. Females, in their turn, started using males as sex objects only, and it even went so far that females killed their lovers when they had fulfilled the sexual act. This was millions, perhaps billions of years ago, but is still an issue in some places in the universe, and certainly here on Earth. This age-long gender conflict is also described in details by Anton Parks in his epic about the history of the Ginnibal, the old reptilian races, in his trilogy The Chronicles of Girka, at this moment unfortunately only available in French. Park's interesting work is, however, translated in part from French to English by Malau and Jerry Zeitlin, but we're still in mystery over what this power that females have more of than men is, so let's see if we can elaborate on that, and why women have been so suppressed. Both in galactic cultures, and here on Earth, according to the Aryan religion, God is feminine in nature and is in fact the 96% dark energy/matter that human science cannot explain, that is 96% of the universe, which is the blackness, darkness between stars and galaxies, by some called the void, or the Khaa. Other names for it are Vril, Chi, Ur and Fatlet. Around 75% of the universe is dark energy, and roughly 21% is dark matter. The remaining 4% of the universe that we can see, but still not fully explain, is that in which we live and can perceive with our five senses, also called the physical universe. LPGC in their working model, Sea Level 1, call it the void, the nothingness outside the thought boundary of the unum. More on this in the two following papers. The Orions and most other evolved star beings in the universe know that because God is feminine, the female energy is more powerful than the male. Also, women are more psychic and can easier tune into the realm of the goddess, the 96%, which is pure spirit. And how do women do this most easily? The answer is through ritual ecstasy, but more easily through their orgasm. Those who have read up on my huge database, Illuminati News, IlluminatiNews.com, or studied similar information, Know that women are almost always used in magic, whether it is old Enochian magic, or magic with a K, which symbolizes the 20th century magician Aleister Crowley's work and all that which branches out from it. Crowley put a K at the end to distinguish it from stage magic that illusionists practice, so for the sake of simplicity, I will do the same thing from here on. On the higher levels of any secret society on Earth that's worth its name, sex magic is a big part of it. And in the many cults of the global elite, a mother goddess is often in the center of them, but still controlled by males, often via sophisticated mind control. Sex magic has by many who don't understand the subject been deemed black magic and called Satanism, not only by Christians, but other religious groups as well. Anyone involved in darkness and dark rituals have been shunned and called Satan worshippers. This is not entirely true. In the beginning, sex magic was the ritual men and women used when they still knew about the divine feminine. They were followers of the Aryan religion. The darkness everybody is talking about was their attempts to connect with the 96% spirit, so-called dark matter and dark energy. There was nothing satanic in these rituals. They were practiced the way they were meant to by two human beings who loved each other and could accumulate power via the female orgasm. At the moment of orgasm, the woman became like a supercharged rod which entered the realm of the goddess, which the Orions call the Khaa, and she could bring divine energy back into the third dimension and accumulate it in her body and soul. Then she could use that power for the good of herself, her family, her tribe, or anything she wanted. This is the root to shamanism, where they knew how to use the female power for the good of things. The female orgasm is but one of more ways for a female being to reach beyond the stars. Again, shamanism, which is an old Orion religion, I've learned, is the answer. Still today we can see shamans dance for hours and sometimes days until they reach a trance-like stage where they can walk on fire without being burned. They have been seen shape-shifting into bears and other creatures, but most importantly, they open up portals to the Khaa, the goddess universe. Before the patriarchs came down on Earth from the stars, there was an androgynous human race, who were the guardians of this planet, and in direct communication with the goddess universe. They had the capacity to easily connect to the depth of the goddess universe just by their thoughts. They were highly multidimensional beings, very friendly, compassionate, humble, and spiritually powerful. Then, when the patriarchs came down to Earth from the stars, they stood face to face with this androgynous race and saw the wonders they could do. The intruding star race did all they could to steal this goddess power, but this early human race refused to give it away or tell the intruders how to get access to it, because they could see that these people were not of the light. So the patriarchs changed things around. They got jealous of the powers of this androgynous race, because they could do what the patriarchs could not, and that annoyed them. After all, they were the Syrian lords, the Kanus kings, and the Sa'ami, the proud warrior race from the stars. Some have called them the Anunnaki. To make a long story short, and I will tell the long story later, they created Homo sapiens to become their slave race and got the idea to make them sexual, in the image of themselves. So they mixed their own DNA with that of the androgynous species and apes that were already inhabitants on the planet, creating this new, hybrid race, hoping they would have the same powers as the androgynous species. However, this time mostly through sexuality, this new hybrid race was Homo sapiens, the thinking man, as we shall see throughout these papers. The Syrian lords succeeded beyond their own imagination. Homo sapiens, this highly sexual race, could do the same things as the androgynous race before them, not only through sacred rituals of ecstasy, but also through the female orgasm. Our creators managed to create a species which they themselves did not fully understand, and still don't up to this day, and the female power they were hoping to use for their own benefit became the secret of Homo sapiens. It became so sophisticated that the Syrians, to their own frustration, couldn't learn how to tame this power and use it for themselves. They are still learning. After Homo sapiens had been created, they were pretty much in the hands of the Syrian lords. They were owned by their creators. Although the lords were patriarchal and in rebellion against the goddess, they let the early humans know that the goddess is the creator of the universe and that she needs to be worshipped through rituals and sacred sex. In the beginning, only certain hand-picked humans were allowed to have sacred sex with Syrian men present, trying to steal the power of the female orgasm when it happened between two humans of opposite sex. Others, like the famous Enki, or Ea, suggested against his half-brother Nammer's, the Enlil, decision and let humans have unlimited sex, but still under supervision and in honor of the goddess, in order to make the rituals more powerful, not because he was matriarchal. Shamanism was always led by the feminine force. Only women could be shamans in the old days, because they are the only ones who can truly not only connect to the Khaa, but also bring back the essence of the goddess. This Khaa can, in the 4% universe, after it's been accumulated, be transformed into very powerful, raw energy of the same kind the goddess used when she creates universes. Nothing else can be compared to it. After the patriarchs had accepted Ea's way of doing things in regards to controlling human sexuality, the Syrians started infiltrating shamanism and replaced the female shaman with a male, and from there on the purpose of, and the original results from shamanism have disappeared from our Western societies and most of the rest of the world. Although male shamans can open up portals as well, they can't accumulate the Khaa and reuse it in the sense a trained female shaman can. All that which women stand for is what the males of certain alien races have been after for so long. This is why we see women being sexually abused and mind-controlled in satanic rituals, and why there is so much pedophilia in high places of society, something that is getting revealed more and more in mainstream media as I write this. In Orion, for example, the female is born to be in the center, and the males are there to protect and support her. It's deeply rooted into their culture, albeit, this is not merely an Orion trait. It has become my understanding that this is very common in the universe, at least in cultures who have genders. Not all extraterrestrial cultures do. The Syrians tried everything from torture, rape, pedophilia to inserting their own souls into female bodies, but nothing worked as well as it did for the humans. The Syrians could gain some of the power from the rituals or from human sex, but they couldn't accumulate much of it, or sustain it over longer periods of times, and they did not gain the power that they wanted so they could conquer the universe and defeat their enemies, because conquerors they were, and conquerors they still are. In fact, their true goal is more sinister than just conquering some other star systems, something which will be revealed throughout these papers. What probably surprised the alien lords the most was that even when they inserted their own soul into a female human, they could not achieve the same thing the human soul could. The reason for this was what the androgynous race had realized the hard way. The Syrians were not of the light, and therefore they could not connect to the depth of the Khaa like humans are able to. With time, when the patriarchal regime understood that if they let the women lead the way to the Khaa and be in charge, they would become too powerful and could threaten the Syrian lords themselves, so they simply turned things around and recreated the strict male society they had implemented on their home worlds, and honoring the goddess became outlawed. The creator of all things now became a male deity, which should be worshipped instead. Sometimes people got to worship several gods, but the main gods were always male and presented as very powerful and in charge of the same thing the goddess is in charge of, the Khaa, the creative forces of the goddess universe. Thus, when everything had failed, and the Syrians could not figure out how to tame the raw female energy, even through torture and sexual abuse, they thought that if these same females were to believe that they, the mighty Syrian lords, were indeed gods, or if they turned all these Syrian deities into one god for humans to worship, the Syrians themselves would be the target for the female rituals and their sexual energy, and that must be the best way for them to accumulate it like the females can. Another thing they did was to instigate more and more sinister rituals, where mind-controlled and traumatized women, called high priestesses, were placed in the center of attention. These women were then raped and tortured, and many of them were sacrifices in bloody rituals, often in the moment of orgasm. In addition to accumulating as much female power as possible through sexual ecstasy, they also drank the blood from the dying female to enhance the effect. Because in the blood runs the spirit of the divine feminine, the mother goddess. Blood is very powerful. We have been living under a patriarchal regime ever since, and these horrific rituals have continued and are practiced in high places behind secret doors up to present time. However, when the patriarchal lords changed things around and created this male-dominated world, there were still tribes hidden from the imposters, tribes who managed to keep the ways of female shamanism relatively intact and continued honoring the mother goddess in order to solve problems within the tribe, such as stopping droughts by evoking rain, curing the sick, helping the dying to pass over, using KHAA to bring about a good hunt, etc. This is what shamanism here on Earth was all about in the beginning, practiced by tribes, hidden from the men of power, in order to be able to practice their religion, the religion of the Mother Goddess, or the Divine Feminine. The female doesn't necessarily have to have orgasm to achieve these divine powers. It can be done through shamanic dancing, but an easier way to accomplish the same goal is through her sexuality. However, today's women have forgotten where their powers lie, and they are as much slaves to the patriarchal regime as men are, just even more suppressed. The more supernatural powers a being has, the more she or he has to be suppressed by the regime that be. A balance between female and male energies. It's easily done when we see how women have been treated over time, to turn everything around and create an extreme on the other end. We certainly don't want to build a mother goddess cult, where we fight over the love of the goddess. This universe has had enough of that, so it's nothing we want to enhance. Building a matriarchal regime to substitute the patriarchal one is not the answer. We are going to talk a lot about the Orion Empire in these papers, because it has had such an enormous influence on humanity from our cradle up to adolescence, which is where we are now. The extraterrestrial societies of Orion are in honor of the Mother Goddess, and have known for a long time that the universe is feminine in nature. Their opponents is the patriarchal regime, which is led by the lords from Sirius, and unfortunately, we humans here on Earth have been caught in the middle of this ancient struggle between matriarchs and patriarchs. These papers are meant to, and hopefully will, shed some light on this issue and present some suggestions to resolve it, perhaps once and for all. It may sound very ambitious, but maybe the solution is simpler than we think, if we all work together. The Orion Empire is a matriarchal society, where everything centers on a queen, who is said to be the multidimensional representative of the Mother Goddess. But it is not a matriarchal regime from how I have had it described, because it does not exclude the male from the picture. It is clearly understood by all races who subscribe to the religion of the Orion Empire that the universe is feminine and that males and females work together to achieve their goals to assist the goddess in her creation. Males and females live in harmony and just have different roles. However, there have been a few races who have not succeeded in understanding the synthesis, which is the natural result between the thesis and the antithesis of female and male, and jealousy amongst the males have been prominent and led to conflicts also in Orion at times. Orion, I've been told by an anonymous source, is more like a beehive community, where everyone is learning their place in life, and each person is supported by the rest to develop the skills and the passions that a person wishes to enhance in order to contribute to the overall society. Because the Orions are so closely connected to Mother Goddess, there are very rarely any conflicts within the empire. This kind of society infrastructure reminds me of what I have called humane meritocracy, which is based on finding out early where a child's talents are and develop them. In a nutshell, there is of course much more to it. This is done when the child is old enough to communicate their passions. These passions should be taken seriously, and if the child so wishes, society will back him or her up and help the child achieve their goals. This way we have children who grow up in a society where they have found their place and can contribute with something that fascinates them. They can work in the field where their passion lies, and we will see a society of happy and healthy beings who are excited to go to work in the morning, because it satisfies the needs of the individual and at the same time contributes to society as a whole. But to achieve a goal like this, a society needs to be spiritually evolved enough to be able to accomplish it. In the beginning, the universe seems to have been entirely feminine. The male energies were created afterwards, when Mother Goddess decided that some races, but not all, should start reproducing by sexual means instead of pure genetic engineering and cloning. Sexuality also let the beings connect with Mother Goddess in a very intimate way, which is not impossible, but harder to achieve otherwise. Sexuality is just another way of Mother Goddess to experience herself in the universe she created. Another important thing I believe is to let men be men and women be women. Still, I think that even though we were born with a certain gender, it's important that we develop both the masculine and feminine inside ourselves to create a balance. I think it was basically this balance that was lacking in the old male gods, who took women as sex slaves. If men let more of their feminine side come to surface and acknowledge it while still being men and masculine, and women bring forth more of their masculine side while still being women and feminine, we create the balance needed for both genders to experience the Mother Goddess energies together, and there would be a better understanding between the genders. It's my true belief that accomplishing this is part of the initiation into higher consciousness. When working with the goddess energy, we need to deeply explore the feminine principle. This goes for both genders. If we ask a woman in today's world to start expressing the powerful fire of her female energy, she almost certainly wouldn't know how to do this. The trick is to go inside. Women must ask themselves what the feelings are that she has inside that she is not expressing. What can she do to become more of a goddess in a female body? The answers are inside. The goddess inside is the one who knows. This is nothing she can read in a book. It has to be felt and experienced, but it's there. The Pleiadians say in Marcignac's book Earth, Pleiadian Keys to the Living Library, that there will be more female teachers and leaders in the near future, because the goddess embodies in her kind. Still, they are quick to add that the goddess also works with male energies, for men will also learn how to embody the goddess. The goddess is not discriminating, and in her there is no anger. She's a very allowing entity, they say. Interestingly, this is also exactly what Robert Morning Sky is emphasizing in his audio lectures on his main website. How Mother Goddess was suppressed in ancient times and replaced with a Father God. In the translation of the Sumerian clay tablets, we stumble upon the Anunnaki deity called Enlil, or the Enlil, as it is actually a title, who is one of a composite of beings who presented themselves in the Bible as Jehovah, Yehovah, or YHVH, the God of the Jews. Here is a clear example how ETs, showing themselves off as gods, turn the true God source into a patriarchal deity of flesh and blood. YHVH in its ultimate term, however, is the true creator, the all that is, the Mother Goddess whom the leaders of the ET patriarchal movement reversed from being a feminine deity to becoming a masculine. I will generally not, however, use the term YHVH when I talk about Mother Goddess, because it's already so confused with the YHVH presented in the Old Testament and elsewhere. Anton Parks has spent a lot of time tracing the concepts of Mother Goddess and male deities in human literature. Here is a quote from his Lee's Secret, note number 22, pages 118-119. Quote, in diverse passages of the Judaic literature but also of the Bible and other traditions of the planet, the original primordial and androgynous source has been subtly replaced by a masculine divinity named God or the Father. It is clearly seen that at the epoch when the scripture made its appearance on earth and the cosmogony of the biblical texts was drafted, in fact, Several thousand years later, after 1000 BC, the religion of the mother goddess was losing ground. In reality, it has not ceased to regress over the course of time. The growing acceptance of the male religions by numerous patriarchal societies rapidly accelerated the extinction of the feminine creator divinity. Under these conditions, the monotheistic drafters could not attribute the full original creation to any entity other than God himself, a masculine entity, while they clearly knew that the first creation was rather the work of plural entities, the Elohim, at the service of a mother goddess, a jointly conceived master plan for the earth. Everything pertaining to this ancient mother goddess divinity was grossly deformed, demonized, or radically suppressed. The patriarchal doctrine that consisted in marking the domination of God over an ancient feminine divinity, totally submitted to its orders, therefore took over. In the mythology of India, the divine and primordial energy is called Shakti, which transposed into Sumerian gives Sa 6 AKTI, literally the good miracle worker of life. Shakti is no other than the representation of the Divine Mother, the Mother Goddess, more precisely the personification of the feminine principle that Hinduism very correctly associates with the Holy Spirit. This obliges us to examine the Hebrew Ruah Elohim, which means Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit, the Mother Goddess, skillfully demonized by the dominant patriarchy of the Judaic religion, is concealed in the demon as Lilith. Some associate Lilith with the Hebrew Layla, night. Others think that Lilith comes from the Sumerian term Eliakut Lti, generally translated as spirit of life. But I would rather interpret it, in our context, as she who gives the breath of life, in the sense of the entity who breathed life into the primordial man. Judaic imagery represents Lilith as a night bird, a symbol taken directly from one of the most ancient attributes of the Mother Goddess, that is to say the bird or the dove that the Christians used to symbolize the Holy Spirit. This volatile aspect of Mother Goddess is also found in Greek mythology, where Eurynome, the universal and primordial goddess, changes into a dove while pondering the universal egg from which all things come. An amusing note, if one translates the name of the primordial goddess from Greek into Sumerian, one gets Erintuam, No in Sumerian, bands of midwives, or old or even ancient women, or again Erintuamemi, bands of midwives of divine order. The same idea is found in the Egyptian traditions, throughout the pyramid texts, which relate that the supreme and androgynous divinity Adam, from his Egyptian name Atimu, metamorphoses into the bird Ben to create the air, the earth, and the sky, or heaven. Thanks again to Emisa, the matrix language of the priestesses that incorporates the Sumero-Assyro-Babylonian particles, we are going to obtain some confirmations and to clarify this a bit more. First, we translate the name of this divinity into Itemu, the meteorological force, which clearly attests to its creative function cited above, creation of the air, the earth, and the sky. Next, its Greek name Adam, which gives it the old father-woman, confirming the androgyny of Adam, or at least the fact that this entity symbolizes different creative forces at the service of the same cause. And finally, the term Ben that is attributed to this bird phoenix creator and that gives Be'ekut, a Lord who speaks. Numerous traditions assimilate the word to the creation of the world. End quote. Figure 1.5, relief of Lilith, with wings, surrounded by owls and lions, both symbols of life designers, or Kadestu, in Sumerian. This is exactly what happened. The Anunnaki took the female terms and names from the Aryan language, which eventually became the Sumerian language, and others, demonized them, and or turned them into masculine to suppress the power of the divine feminine. In an interview called Emerging Feminine, the famous researcher Michael Zarion brings up that anthropologists know that the females were the keepers of the wisdom. One of our tasks right now, he says, is to bring the Holy Grail back to its femininity, something that has been almost totally lost over time. Don't think for a moment that Marduk and his sons, who are still controlling us behind the scenes, don't understand the power of the feminine. They are very scared that we humans are going to regain this power by seeing through the lies. They are terrified that we start listening to our women once they have regained their psychic abilities and their ancient wisdom, something that is happening all over the world as we speak. I believe we incarnate both as females and males, respectively, in order to have both experiences. When being males, one of our jobs is to bring out the feminine part of ourselves and balance it with our masculine part, but also to support and protect the females so they can keep their connection with Source intact, in order to accumulate creative goddess energies. So, the feminine power really is embedded in the female body, boosted by the soul's connection with the divine feminine. In the Orion Empire, the males have to present themselves as females before the queen's court to concur with the vibrations of the divine feminine. This doesn't necessarily mean that they dress in skirts, but that they bring in their feminine energies to the court to be able to successfully match the energies of the mother goddess. In its extreme, to prevent the divine feminine from coming to the surface, especially in women, they produce TV shows where young women fight each other, just like men are doing, punching each other with their fists and beating each other up pretty badly, exaggerating their male energies, just like it was done in the 60s and 70s, but now in a new and much more violent fashion. Many people can't wait until the evening comes when they can sit down after work, screaming and cheering their way through these shows. Like Desarian says in the same interview, the global elite knows exactly what is about to occur. Mankind is starting to be aware of the divine feminine, slowly but surely, and they can't let that happen. Still, it is a slow transition in the beginning. We have been manipulated for so long to believe that God is a male, that we can switch views with a handshake. If we want to make sure we succeed, we need to be balanced, and find a partner who is balanced, or that both are working on becoming so. An important part of experiencing this balance and regain the feminine power within ourselves is through our sexuality. This doesn't mean we should be promiscuous. It is more important than ever to find the real soul connection between the man and the woman to reach the maximum effect. Elohim as feminine life designers. How interesting isn't it then, when we see Anton Parks claim that the Elohim were female life designers, and that Elohim is a female word to begin with? Having Aryan origins, a large majority of the myths and legends about ancient Earth talk about female visitors from elsewhere, and we don't need to go further than to our own Bible. In Genesis 1:26, the word Elohim, meaning feminine gods in plural, is usually translated as God. The term Elohim is divided in Sumerian Akkadian as Al-Gu-Akut Hayim, the powerful Hai that mixed the clay, or clay equals man. These Elohim form an association of ethnic and cultural planners who work directly with, and for, Source, the highest of all. This source contains a female energy, that of Mother Goddess. These female beings are in conflict with the male authority of the Sumerian texts, the so-called Anunnaki and Zechariah Sitchin's Epos, the Earth Chronicles. The female life designers belong to a group of beings Parks called Katastudef, a word I've learned is Aryan Orion in its origins. The root word is the Aryan word Khaadhi, where Khaa is pertaining to the life force or the void, Dh is denoting Genesis, I means at the side of, SS, or S with Karen, is causative. T when it stands alone emphasizes the feminine, and U is plural. The interesting thing with this interpretation is that I translated it myself into the Aryan language after an anonymous source taught me the basic structure and grammar of the Aryan language. The rest was quite easy. I showed my translation to this person, who approved. So Kadistu is Aryan and means something similar to life force in the beginning of time, standing at the side of the causative female, and they are more than one in numbers. In both Sumerian, Akkadian as well as the Aryan language, from which the first two stem, one long word like Khaadhi, consists are 6 words if you count them, Khaa plus Dh plus I plus SS plus T plus U. all meaning something different but when connected with each other via dots or hyphens, respectively, they build a concept and is a compromised way of presenting an alien language in the human, Latin alphabet. This word, Kadistu, is evidence which tells us that there is a female life force in the universe, because that's what the word means. As we shall see, the absolute majority of the Kadistu are females, but there are a few exceptions. Not only does the word go back to Sumerian times, but is clearly Aryan in origin, or I wouldn't have been able to translate it. The translation fits perfect with what the Sumerian Akkadian word stands for. The causative female, SST, is Mother Goddess herself. The War on Females in Earth History. Even after the ultimate political religious patriarchs got their stronghold here on Earth, Mother Goddess cults were still present, but were often secretive and in hiding. The patriarchal movement was terrified of them. In fact, these groups, practicing the feminine religion from the stars, could easily break their control over mankind if the truth became known. We know from history that the powerful Catholic Church, for example, saw women as something they could beat, torture, rape and enslave. Also, it was promoted that a woman had no soul. If this is not a sign of the Church being terrified of the divine feminine, I don't know what is. Today, the witch hunt on women has decreased drastically, but women are still often classified as second-hand citizens, and in the Arab countries the Muslim women must wear a veil, as we all know, and is the man's property. These countries never got out of, and are still stuck in, the horror of the Dark Ages, and in these countries, very little has changed over the centuries. In 1484, Pope Innocent VIII, what a name of a tyrant, decided that the Inquisition should start hunting down the old matriarchal religion. The publication in 1486, the Malleus Maleficarum, The Witch's Hammer, a work of the Dominicans, Heinrich Kramer and Johann Spranger, laid the ground for the tyranny which spread through Europe and North America, and lasted for more than 2 centuries. An estimate of 9 million heretics, 80% of them women, children or young girls, whom the Church thought had inherited the evil of their mothers, were murdered. In the medieval Catholic Church, women and their sexuality was evil incarnated. Definition of witch. Because of the Catholic Church and their genocide of women, we often think of the word witch as something negative and evil. But how about if we break down this word as well to see where it comes from? Anton Parks was actually doing this in an interview with Carmipolis. In the Sumerian language, the root to the word witch is, according to Parks, miasu. The simple decomposition of miasu gives us the woman with the secretion wisdom or the woman venom knowledge. The Sumerian homophony game will still give us some additional details without distorting the original meaning of the term. If we switch us and mi, we obtain us mizu or wise women in blood, or the woman who raises the knowledge, or wisdom. Again, the patriarchal movement doesn't want us to know about the divine feminine, so they are killing all movements which are trying to put the record straight. Of course, not every witch knows the whole story about the divine feminine, but the global elite takes no chances. Cosmogony from a new point of view. According to many evolved star races out there, allegedly, the universe is not neuter. For energy to be aware, it has to be conscious, and for it to be conscious, it would have to be able to identify with things, for example feelings. Male and female, neuter cannot experience this as it is nothing. Much like a person whose nervous system feels nothing, they are in a vegetative state and are deemed mentally dead. The goddess is the ultimate creator, at least as far as it is known by older, more evolved beings in the multiverse. She is the void which quantum physicists like LPGC are talking about as surrounding the perceived egg-shaped unum, or multiverse. But the unum as depicted in a 2D form is only a model, of course, and in reality the 96% void is all intertwined. It is among us and around us, and within us. It's the black space that scientists can't explain, because they don't know what it is and what it does. So it is also very much predominant in four space-time, and in time-space, which is the ether. Hence, it's very interesting when we hear from scientists that they are supposedly starting to understand how the universe works. I would say that they are still in kindergarten at best, at least when it comes to the knowledge they release to the public. Behind the scenes, they know so much more. But remember, they too are working for the patriarchal regime. The first thing we need to understand is that the KHAA, or the void, is intelligent energy. It is the essence of the mother goddess, and therefore feminine. Those who say they have experienced the KHAA and explain it as being a nothingness, but a nothingness of bliss, without thought, emotions, or any other of the senses we normally are used to. It is just because of that, we are not used to this kind of energy. All people I've heard of, whom have been there, also say it is a place of pure love, unconditional love. And for it to be that, it can't be a nothingness, or neuter, or it would be totally void of any emotions or sensations. The real problem is that we humans, with our limited perceptions, can't understand the raw goddess energy, and the above is the best way those who have experienced it can describe it. However, the energy is still feminine. If we don't understand the 96% of the universe, and can't even claim to know the 4%, how much do we really understand of reality? And some people say there are no ETs from other dimensions. How can they be so sure, when we, who live in the 4%, are actually the ones in minority? Think about it. Scientists also say we use only up to 10% of our brain capacity. ETs understand this, and like David Icke says, dark is only dark because humanity and its technology can tune into it and make it manifest in its reality. The Pleiadians expands on this thought by saying, your planet must learn who the goddess is as a creator. You must. Understanding the dark side of the goddess is part of exploring her energy, because the goddess did something to lose her power. It is in the cells of your being because all of you, men and women alike, have the goddess within you. The goddess is going to be birthed through you, whether you were male or female. There was a decline and fall of the goddess for very important reasons. What those reasons were will be clearly explained later on in these papers. In the Aryan cosmogony, the feminine omniverse, which is alive and whom they call the goddess, once upon a time created the physical universes as a way to express herself throughout the dimensions. She appointed the builders, creator gods, who then, in service of the mother, went out and created galaxies, stars, planets, and seeded life on them. But the life force in this universe sprung from the galactic centers, and by rotating in a spiral pattern, life extends outwards towards the fringes. Hence, the oldest stars, in general, should be found in the outskirts of the galaxy, one would think, but this is not always the case. Stars are popping up everywhere, because they are evolving creator gods themselves ready to let others seed life on their own heavenly bodies. Their main star system, or headquarters of sorts for the Orion Empire, is said to be the star system Indica in a constellation of Orion, some 900 light-years from Earth. The history of the Orion Empire could probably fill up volumes of books, as I always can sense a story behind a story when I research star races. It appears that Orion in present time is an overall rather peaceful empire, but there are indications that it hasn't always been that way. They, too, have of course gone through stages of evolution, where conquest was a big part of it. According to most research here on Earth, the Aryans spent millions of years conquering space and were involved in a number of galactic wars before they became more spiritually oriented and evolved into an empire with peaceful laws and policies. They also became master geneticists. After billions of years of seeding the universe, the Aryans had a vast majority of inhabited star systems in the Milky Way and other galaxies joining Orion, and the Queen's Empire became known as the Orion Empire, or the Aryan Empire, where Ari, or Mary, Mary, means mother, and an means extension of something, or Orion, the heavenly empire in Aryan language, hence we have Aryan meaning extension of mother or Aryan Empire. This is where the names Mary and Marianne come from. the latter also meaning extension of the mother. The English language has a lot of Aryan origins to it. Over time, the Orion Empire grew to an incomprehensibly vast empire, spanning across the universe and even extending into other universes. This is why it is so hard when we talk about different star races here on Earth and where they come from. If someone says a star race comes from Lyra, we may still be talking about the Orion Empire, because at least part of the Lyra constellation is part of the Empire, so it can be pretty confusing if we are not aware of how vast it is. I will go into this some more as we move on. The Aryans, and most evolved alien races, are not third-dimensional beings like we are, but multidimensional and interdimensional in nature. These are specially designated souls, so they don't change because one of their bodies would be killed or die in one way or the other. We can perhaps compare it to the Dalai Lama. When he dies, they look for a new Dalai Lama, who has a new, younger body, but is still supposedly a reincarnation of an earlier Dalai Lama. Furthermore, the Aryans talk about the fire, which is another word for soul. In Orion they look at souls as fires. The origin or this fire stems then, naturally, from the mother goddess, the 96% dark energy matter, and is thus feminine in nature. Sexes came into the picture much later. It is my understanding that sex as a way of reproducing is, if not rare, not the most common way to reproduce in the universe, hence so many non-physical star races want to come down here to have sex. In the beginning, star races were cloning and/or used genetic engineering to create more of their own species. This may sound odd to us, but is quite a convenient way to create new vessels for the souls when the old ones in one way or the other is beyond repair. Interdimensional ETs don't die in the sense we do, there is no death. So, if these entities could reproduce through sex, their species would pretty soon be overpopulated. However, this has happened, as George Labuano describes in his fascinating book, Alien Mind, which can be downloaded for free in Word and PDF, with the author's consent. The Cosmic Orgasm. Barbara Marciniak's Pleiadians, from here on called the Pleiadians, plain and simple, to distinguish from Barbara Handclau's Pleiadians, whom I from now on will call Pleiadians B, are often talking about the divine feminine and mother goddess in their books and lectures, and here is an example and another excerpt from Marciniak's excellent book, Earth, the Pleiadian Keys to the Living Library. The pain of the Pleiadian experiment has to do with finding a way to appease the mother goddess, because it is the mother goddess with whom we are all connected. The Pleiadians also talk about the galactic center being the womb of the mother, of course referring to the female womb and genitals, therefore referring to the galaxy, as the rest of the universe, to be feminine in nature. This is a pretty interesting concept if we take it to another level. Look at the following picture, Figure 1-9. The Pinwheel Galaxy, also known as Messier 101 or NGC 5457, a quite typical spiral galaxy, located around 20 million light-years from Earth. What do we see? Well, if we follow the Pleiadian concept, we have the womb of the mother in the middle, the galactic center with millions of stars clustered close together so it looks like one single supergiant star when in fact there are many. Then, in the middle, impossible to see in this picture, is a giant black hole. It sure looks like a great cosmic orgasm, and in a way we might say that it is, when nebulae and stars shoot out from the womb of the mother in the center. But if the mother gave birth to a galaxy by being impregnated, it has to be done with a male energy involved, one would think. This is not impossible either, as the goddess created both genders and thus can be both. However, the nebulae and stars, and even the galaxy itself as a whole, is pure feminine energy. So it's more likely that the galaxies were created in a different way, but how? It's done by sound. The universe is made up by sound, another thing we will detail more in the next paper. If you could expand yourself so you can see the whole universe from above, you would be able to hear the symphonies of the galaxies, something I was teaching people from the time I was 14 years old and which I now get confirmed by my research. Now, take a look at the galaxy again, figure 1-9. Imagine that you can shrink this particular galaxy to a size where it fits on a big table, which represents the universe, or the part of the universe close to the galaxy. Pretend that the stars and clusters you see are grains of salt, but not yet spiral-like, but everything is just a round sphere. Then apply certain sound frequencies to the table. What would happen? If all grains of salt were gathered in a huge galactic center, eventually by applying particular sound frequencies, you would get a similar spiral pattern like the one you have in figure 9. In the picture you can almost see that if you applied more sound to it, it would scatter and move even more. This is how it is done. Each galaxy looks different from its neighbor, and that is because they vibrate on different sound frequencies. This is an exciting revelation, because we also know that dimensions and densities vibrate on different frequencies. Does this mean that each galaxy, if they all vibrate slightly different, are starting their evolution of life in slightly different densities so the universe can let the Mother Goddess experience more? It is most certainly so. Inanna, the female rebel. In Sitchin's work, Inanna is portrayed as a female warrior who had an engulfing appetite for men and sex. She slept with anyone she could find who had a phallus, figuratively speaking, and even opened up a whorehouse, which she ran and participated in. To put it mildly, Sitchin did not put Inanna in a positive light. He even claimed that she killed her lovers after they had satisfied her, and she was a merciless war goddess whose main attention was on power and sex. This is probably where the myth of the Black Widow is originally coming from. Black Widow, for those who don't know, is also a spider who eats her male after she is impregnated. Anton Parks, on the other hand, tell another story than that of Sitchin's. Parks claims that Sitchin has misinterpreted the Sumerian texts, and that Inanna in fact supported the cult of the Mother Goddess, as he calls it, and was therefore a rebel and hated by the patriarchal controllers of the earth at the time. Her courage to openly practice the religion of the divine feminine brought her singular reprisals from the gods in the Mesopotamian texts, and also from the adepts of Yahweh of the Bible, who is a composite of many gods, mostly the Anunnaki Lord, Namur, the Enlil, and King Anu. Uruk, which was the town designated to Inanna, was, according to Parks and his English translator, Jerry Zeitlin, the city of prostitutes and daughters of joy. Now, if we look up the word prostitution, we find that it is Latin and means to put up front for sale, or to place forward, and was originally not referring to someone who charged for sex to feed sex-hungry men. On the contrary, Parks and Zeitlin are stating that here is where women were instructed in the initiation of men into sacred sexuality. So she was not opening a whorehouse in our sense of the word, but a place where men and women could learn about sacred sex, opposed to having sex just to ejaculate and leave the woman unsatisfied, especially when women are, as most of us know, multi-orgasmic. The male gods who were here on Earth in ancient times usually had sex for the purpose of domination and control, and to extend their power and bloodlines, failing, as we've discussed earlier, to fully understand the female orgasm and real sex magic. However, they did know that the females carry the secrets of the universe within, but they didn't understand what it is or how to get it, although they certainly went way and beyond to try to get it. Inanna and her team apparently taught men they thought were ready to learn, or relearn rather, how sacred sex works. I can only imagine how this must have infuriated the Anunnaki power elite. The story doesn't tell what the Anunnaki did to the males who were initiated in these rituals, though. Were they tortured to reveal the secrets, or what happened? For those interested in this subject, here is something to further research. Later on I will explain to the reader that the term Anunnaki is misleading and another of Sitchin's mistranslations, but until I get to that point, I will use the term Anunnaki for the negative ETs from Sirius and the planet Sa-Ame, whom I discussed in Level 1. Another thing to mention here is that Inanna is simply a title that can be used by anybody and is normally not designated to a person. It stems from INA, again meaning an extension of the mother. However, this doesn't mean a person couldn't take on that title and use it as her name. We do similar things here on Earth. The great suppressed powers of the feminine. Our bodies are comprised of billions of tiny little fires, electrical particles called molecules and atoms, the expert learned men tell us. This quote is taken from Robert Morningsky's opening paragraph of his 2008 Review papers, which are no longer online. The thing is that every second of our existence, our nerve endings send about 100 million signals to our body and our brains. Still, studies have shown that on our best day, we utilize only 40 of these signals. That is what we call our awareness. This really puts things a little bit more in perspective. We are talking about the human body here, which while we are on Earth is our nerve center, the vessel which helps us perceive the universe from a 3D perspective. However, no one in human form can today even begin to understand the capacities that our biological bodies have. They are highly multidimensional and have the potentials to send and receive on all levels of the multidimensional cosmos. It's like a hypersensitive antenna. In level 1, we were talking about how parts of our DNA, which our bodies in their original form had in a functional state to be able to stay multidimensional, were cut off, basically by limiting the frequency range of which we can perceive reality, resulting in us being disconnected from the majority of the multiverse. This is what I see between the lines in Morning Sky's statement. All the great majority of signals are just passing us by and we don't even notice them. Now, when we are becoming more aware, we are picking up more of these signals as our junk DNA is being reactivated. Barbara Marciniak is also mentioning something very similar in her excellent book, Bringers of the Dawn. The Rites of Sacred Ecstasy. Robert Morning Sky, like many ancient native tribes, equate the soul with fire, the fire within, which is a gift from the Creator, that makes the goddess dimensions accessible to the beings of different realities. Way back in time, says Morning Sky, there were those who practiced rites of sacred ecstasy of the goddess, when people lived much closer to earth and nature around them. This made them much more psychic and multidimensional, and they understood the power of the divine feminine. These rites still exist in somewhat watered-down versions amongst the native peoples around the world, but even there a lot of knowledge has been lost over time. Today's rites, closest to the original ones, can be found in Siberian shamanism. Robert goes on, talking about shamanism, the ways of magic and sorcery, and how they were the ways and rites of sacred ecstasy. These were not rites of sex, he points out, but rites of fire. In those rituals, a woman in the throes of ecstasy could leave the real world, the 4%, and connect with the other world, the 96% of all that is, which is otherwise not accessible to humans to any significant degree. For a moment, those women could be truly omnidimensional. With practice, women could then surrender to embrace this ecstasy and delve deeper and deeper into the other world. Thus, once they master their ecstatic experiences, they could get closer and closer to the ultimate divine, the Mother Goddess. Unfortunately, these old secrets, in their essence, are lost to mankind. Once the patriarchal regime took over, after the ET invader forces rose into power, men also rose to become commanders of the rites. Men, however, did not, and do still not understand and know the hidden language of ecstasy, as Robert calls it. These men assign their own values to something they did not know, and soon the divine feminine had been transformed to the divine masculine. The rites that previously allowed humans who participated in them, women and men, to tune into the goddess universe now instead kept mankind trapped in the real world. Ecstasy became forbidden, and denial and suppression of fire was now the key to the otherworld paradise, claimed the men of power. To further emphasize their correctness in this, they claimed having direct contact with the divine. After years of research and numerous travels within the USA and other countries, visiting natives and participating in, and learning about, their rituals and religions, Morning Sky came to the conclusion that the universe is certainly feminine in nature and God actually should not be Father God but Mother Goddess, nor is the universe or the divine neuter, but feminine in its essence. He found out that the earliest practices of shamanism were based on increasing the bioelectricity of the human body. There are different ways to achieve this increase, but the easiest way is to take advantage of the natural powers that women have, and this is what the ancients did. Later on, these women were called high priestesses. When a woman who could access these powers from within exploited them, she generated an enormous amount of electrical energy, energy which if it could be absorbed could be used in the outside world. She became like a lightning rod, attracting the natural energies of the earth, and a generator that focused these energies into a usable force. In level 1, I talked about that the human DNA is a part of the living library, and that our DNA is encoded, and there is a key to the library, which we humans have hidden in our genes. This key is something many extraterrestrials want to get access to, because that would make them in charge of the library. So far, the key has remained hidden. Morning Sky mentions this as well in his Eridu papers, I discovered. He says that the female fire is the missing key to the Terra papers, and that he had been pondering for a long time why the Queen of the Stars, the Orion Queen, wanted so desperately to acquire what was hidden within human beings. He asks the question, what had Lord Enki embedded in us? This is a good question. However, I think the answer may not lie with Lord Enki, but this code may have been put in our DNA before Enki even came into the picture. I believe it was put there by the original life designers. Morning Sky's conclusions are that we humans shall achieve the stars and the other world, not through technology, which is grounded in the 4% reality, but through our own fire, with which we can reach into the 96% other world. The rites of sacred ecstasy are about the fire, residing naturally in women and a fire that men want to possess. The mainstream scientific community and their pseudoscience. We are going to stay with Robert Morning Sky and parts of his Eridu papers for a little bit longer, because he has a very sobering view on how the science community tunes into this thing with dark matter/dark energy. Robert is telling us that the experts of our world, amongst whom he mentions astronomers, physicists, and scientists, say that our universe is made up of 21% dark matter. These experts, however, can't tell us what dark matter is. All they know is that it is invisible, it is present, and they have no clue how it affects our real world. Then, Robert continues, we have the Einsteinian partner to dark matter, which is dark energy. The best experts in the world are telling us that dark energy makes up 75% of the universe. These experts can't tell us what dark energy is, either. So here we are with 75% dark energy plus 21% dark matter equals 96% of the universe that no one can explain or has a clue to what it is or what it does. Left is 4% of the universe which the experts can address. But even this tiny 4% can only be explained to a small degree. This ultimately leaves us with a tiny little fraction of the entire universe that the experts can actually explain. Or can they even do that? I'm not trying to be cynical, but just as a matter of fact, the truth is that an average man has 16,731 billion particles of dark matter passing through his body every second of every single day. Now, there is 3 times as much dark energy as there is dark matter. Hence, an average man has nearly 17 billion particles of dark matter penetrating his body every second of the day and 51 billion particles of dark energy, while women have 15 billion particles of dark matter and 45 billion particles of dark energy penetrating her body every second of the day. These calculations are based on the average height and body mass of males and females. Then the fact remains, we humans are constantly being penetrated by particles we can't even begin to understand how they affect us, and ultimately, the so-called experts in our science community, whom are very authoritarian and firm about their status when comes to knowledge about how the universe works, can't explain 96% of the universe. Still, they think they know how things work, what is real and what is not. And that is exactly my point, and has always been, as well as morning skies. And I quote, "Pray tell, how can experts who cannot definitively explain even 4% of the universe, and who freely admit that they cannot explain 96% of the universe, confidently and without doubt say that mysterious entities and mysterious powers cannot exist?" This is not just amazingly narrow-minded and ludicrous, but also arrogant to the extreme. If we think about it, we humans and our reality are, and must be, in minority. The real world must then in fact be the remaining 96% and we are the oddballs in the larger scheme of things. But of course, according to the science community, magic, shamanism and the other world cannot exist. In fact, if this chapter was the only thing you ever read in your life and took it to heart, you will, per definition, have a much broader perspective of the universe and reality than anyone within the mainstream science community, in my humble opinion. As Morning Sky so accurately points out, the same experts say that the natives live in a world of myth and fantasy, and that they live in the world of truth and reality. But who lives in a fantasy world, and who does not? In fact, the natives were doing just fine before the white man came. Unfortunately, we have listened too long to our experts, who have done nothing but mis and disinformed us, and most people in the civilized world have swallowed their lies and arrogance with hook and sinker. The consequences of this is that we have further and further disconnected from the real world and embraced the fantasy world of science and their educated, brainwashed and manipulated authorities. Only a few hundred years ago or less, people could still to a certain degree connect with the spirit world and entities and beings of other dimensions and densities. Even my own mother, who was brought up in the northern parts of Sweden in the 1920s and 1930s, when they were still farmers and lived close to the vast forests in that part of the world, has told me stories about how people saw things that they couldn't explain, like gnomes, fairies, and other for us strange creatures they called mitras. Still, this was quite normal and people didn't mind talking about it and comparing notes when they visited each other. We could go on comparing how scientists work with their so-called evidence, and how a spiritual person works, but I think the reader gets the point. Like I said, it's quite sobering and mind-boggling how we in the Western societies have been lied to and steered away from our multidimensional selves to narrow our band of perception to such a degree that we don't even think that anything outside our five senses is real. Now we have to rewire our brains by first disagreeing with the same authorities who have taught us what is real and not, and then once again connect with nature and what is way and beyond this planet that we live on to be able to get some real learning done. And who is behind the science community? That's right, the same controlling forces that have been around for almost 500,000 years, perhaps more, and whose front men and front women are the global elite, by some called the Illuminati, and you can also quite clearly see how they are manipulating us to keep us within the frequency band they want us trapped, so that we are more easily controlled. With the obvious examples brought up in this chapter, you the readers, can easily expand your consciousness to include religion, politics, the monetary system, and education in this whole conspiracy against humankind. So now, when we've come full circle on this, we can go on and talk some more about these multidimensional forces who most people don't know exist, who belong to the world we cannot see, and are therefore, by definition, invisible, unless they decide to show themselves, which they can and do, on occasion, or we expand our consciousness so we can see them. We are going to go back in time way before Homo sapiens sapiens were created, and then tell the story about the creation of we humans from a perspective that I've found much more accurate and explanatory than that of Sitchin's. Although, I would say that the two stories, the one about the Anunnaki, told by Sitchin, and the one I am about to tell, are complementary of each other and one does not necessarily exclude the other. This will be clearer as we move on and the reason why I wrote the first level of learning. With that said, let us go back to Genesis. How, and by which forces in addition to the Mother Goddess, was the universe created? Follow me on the fantastic journey through time, which starts from the beginning and ends in the near future, a journey spanning over billions and billions of years.